What's up, guys? Justin here with the SketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, we're going to continue our series on getting started in SketchUp by starting to model 3D objects. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. Okay, and so let's talk about the concept of going to 3D in SketchUp. So the way that going to 3D in SketchUp works is you're usually going to extrude a 3D shape. So if you remember, in the last video, we talked about how you can draw closed-in shapes by drawing coplanar edges. So in this case, if you were to tap the R key to activate the rectangle tool, we're going to single click and we're going to move our mouse until we get to this little inference that says square right here. And then we're just going to type in 2 foot, comma, 2 foot, and hit the enter key. What that does is that draws a 2 foot by 2 foot square on the ground. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to take this object to 3D. And so to do that, we're going to use a tool known as the push-pull tool. And so the keyboard shortcut for the push-pull tool is going to be the P key. Now remember that you can download my free printable keyboard shortcuts guide to help you remember this at TheSketchUpEssentials.com/beginner. But what we want to do is we're going to tap the P key right here. That's going to activate that push-pull tool. Now notice how when we mouse over this face, it's going to shade in. And we also have our directions at the bottom of the page telling us how we can work with this tool. So notice what it says is click to select the face that you want to push-pull, or in this case, we're just going to single click on this face and we're going to move our mouse up. So notice what it does is it takes the shape that we have selected in here and it extrudes it. So it's basically moving a copy of the face up, but then it's also drawing the fill-in geometry in here so that this becomes a three-dimensional shape. Now notice that over here in the lower right-hand corner, that distance bar is populating with whatever our distance is in here. Well, that also indicates that we can type in a value. Now remember that we don't click in here and do that. We just type in a value. So in this case, I'm going to type in 2 foot and hit the enter key right here. Again, remember not to click and drag. You want to single click, move your mouse, and then type in the value and hit the enter key. So notice that we can do this with other shapes too. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap the C key to draw a circle. And so I just want to single click and move my mouse in order to draw a circle, and you can make it as wide as you want. But notice how that's going to draw a circle with a face in it. Well, now if I tap that P key, mouse over the face and single click like this, I can use this in order to extrude to whatever height I want. And notice how I don't have to click on the object in order to do that extrusion. I can mouse over other objects and I can use the inferencing in order to set how tall this is going to be. So in this case, notice how if I click on this surface right here or on one of these edges, this is going to draw this to that exact same height as the box over here, like this. Now, I don't want to get massively in depth on this, but notice how if you activate the push-pull tool and you mouse over any of these flat faces, this is going to try to select them. But if you try to push-pull this curved surface, it's not going to work. And so the reason for that is because if you go up to View and you toggle on Hidden Geometry, notice that this face is actually made up of a series of flat faces inside your model. Well, what that means is when that hidden geometry is toggled off, there's actually multiple faces in here. And so you can't push-pull it because this is actually a bunch of flat surfaces in here. So all that to say, you can push-pull flat objects. You cannot push-pull curved objects without using some sort of extension. Now, the next thing I want you to know is not only can you use the push-pull tool to add material, you can also use it to remove material. So let's say that I was to take this face, I'm going to tap the L key to activate the line tool, and I'm going to split it with a line like this. Well, now if I activate the push-pull tool and push-pull this back, notice what this is doing is this is actually removing material from that object. And so I could mouse over this edge right here in order to find this midpoint, but notice how by splitting a face like this, you can actually use this to remove material. Now, one thing that's kind of cool about this, and we'll talk more about this in a second, is if I push-pull until this hits a flat face on the back side, notice how what it's going to do is it's actually going to remove the material on the back side like this. And note that this is going to work with the arc tool as well. So not only can I use this to create a bevel, I can also use this to create a curved surface like this one. So it's a really cool way of being able to remove materials in your model. And just real quick, if I was to draw a line across here, notice how I could also remove some of the materials on this object right here, like this. So what I want to do is I want to activate the line tool. So I'm going to tap the L key on my keyboard. I'm just going to move off to this side. So I'm just going to scroll out with my scroll wheel. I'm going to move over here and I'm going to draw a line using the line tool. And again, remember, you want to single click, you want to move your mouse in this direction. And I'm just going to type in a value of 10 feet right here. I'm going to move my mouse in this direction right here, and I'm going to type in 10 feet again. Notice how I have moved my mouse in the red inferencing direction before I do this. Now, what I want to do with this is I want to create a wall. But in this situation, I don't want to go in and draw like a 6-inch line right here and then figure out, the 6 inches over here and then draw a line over. Like, you can do that, but it's going to be a bunch of extra work. What I want to do instead is I want to select these edges and I want to use a tool called the offset tool. What the offset tool is going to do is it's going to take edges and offset them in a direction that we pick. So select these two edges, tap the F key on your keyboard, and then notice how you can mouse over this edge and single click, and you can move your mouse in or out in order to set the offset direction. In this case, I want to offset this in by a value of 6 inches. So I'm just going to type in 6 and hit the enter key. And then I'm just going to draw little edges on either side in order to close this in, like this, using the line tool. So now what that's going to do is that's going to give us the ability to push-pull this up. So tap the P key, single click, and then type in a value of 10 feet right here. That's going to give us a wall in the background. Well, now what I want to do is I want to use the push-pull tool in order to remove material to cut a hole. So to do that, I'm going to start by using a tool called the tape measure tool. What the tape measure tool does is it allows me not only to measure between points, right? I can use it to measure a distance between points, but notice how if it has the little plus showing up next to it, that puts it in create guide mode. If you don't see a little plus next to your icon, tap the control key. But if I single click on this edge, and don't pick a point on the edge, pick the actual edge, but if I single click, I can move my mouse over and I can create a guide. This is like snapping a chalk line in construction. It's basically just a guideline that's in the 3D space that I can use in order to see where things are going to go. So notice how I can also draw a guide off of this guide. So in this case, I'm going to draw a guide that's 2 feet over. For this one, I'm going to draw a guide that's 2 feet over, or that's going to be just by typing in a value, right? So in this case, I'm going to say that this opening is going to be 32 inches off the ground right here. But if I single click and move my mouse and type in a value of like 48 and hit the enter key, that's going to draw a guide 48 inches high. Well, now what I can do is I can draw a rectangle on top of these guides like this. So now I've roughed out an opening. Well, with the push-pull tool active, what you can do is you can tap the P key, move your mouse over this and single click, and then notice how I can move my mouse until it finds the option for on face. Basically what it's doing is it's finding the back edge in here, and once it finds it, it's saying, okay, if you were to click right here, I'm going to be on face. Well, when you do that, notice what it does is it cuts a hole. So anytime you push-pull through something like this, and you push-pull to the back side, and I find moving my mouse over to like a corner or something like that is really helpful, but notice how this is automatically going to cut a hole in your wall like this. So let's say we wanted to create a door. We do the same thing. So tape measure, single click, move mouse. You're going to find your midpoint. You're going to find both sides of your wall. You're going to find the top of the wall right here. And you're going to draw a rectangle like this. Now, notice if you get a bunch of guides in your model, you can do an edit, delete guides, and that'll get rid of them all. But if I push-pull this to that back wall and click, notice how it's going to cut the opening in my wall like this. And so we're going to come back to this in a second. So make sure you save this portion of your model. But Now I want to talk about another way to extrude things in 3D. So we've talked about the push-pull tool, which push-pulls things in one direction. But sometimes you need to take a profile and it needs to follow along a path. So let's say I drew an edge like this, and like this. And say that I wanted to draw a shape along this path. Well, the problem is, say that we were to draw just a simple rectangle. So I'm going to tap R. You can tap the left arrow key in order to lock this to an up direction. And let's say I was to type in a value of, we'll say 2 inches, 6 inches. So say it was a 2 by 6. Well, if I was to try to take this object and pull it along this shape, that starts getting really problematic because I have to come in here and manually draw this edge right here, and I realize that the actual dimensions of a 2 by 6 are not 2 by 6, but for this example, it's fine. But notice how this is a lot of additional work to come in here and do this manually, right? You have to redraw things, and it gets even harder if you're trying to do something with like a circular shape. So what we can do instead is we can use a tool called the Follow Me tool. And what the Follow Me tool is going to do is it's going to take an object and it's going to extrude it along a path. So in this case, the path is these edges right here. And so what we want to do, and a lot of people do this wrong when they first start doing it, what they do is they activate the tool and then they click on it and then they kind of like mouse over the path like this, which does work. Like notice how it is taking this object and trying to extrude it along the path, but it's not the ideal way of doing this, right? The ideal way of doing this using this tool is you pre-select a path like this, you activate the Follow Me tool right here, and you click on a shape and it's going to automatically extrude it along this path. And so let's take a look at this in a couple different situations. So let's say that I was to copy this, and we'll talk more about copying in the next video, by the way, but say that we were to draw a circle right here, we can just select the path, activate the tool, and it's going to extrude along the path. Now, one thing to note about this is you do need this to be a continuous path. So if I was to, we're going to select this, and we're going to do a shift click, and we're going to click and drag over here so that we select both of these. Notice how if I try to run the Follow Me tool here, it doesn't like it because it's not a continuous path. So the path actually needs to be continuous in order to do this. But where this gets really valuable, let's hop back over here for a second. Where this gets really valuable is, say that I wanted to add a crown molding over here. Well, what I could do is I could draw a profile. And we're just going to draw a simple profile. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, so apologies in advance. But say that this just kind of curved like this. And we've got a crown molding profile. And you can tap the E key, click and drag right here. Well, notice how if I was to select these two edges by doing a click and then a shift click, then I was to run the Follow Me tool, that's going to extrude this along that path right here, like this. So now we have a crown molding. This is also really good for things like base profiles. Now, one other thing I want you to note about this, because this is getting a little bit long, is you can also use this to remove material in a closed shape. So instead of coming in here and selecting this path like this, what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to click on this surface. If you click on a surface, it will basically use the bounding edges of this object as a path. But if I run the Follow Me tool, notice how this is actually going to remove material around the outside of this shape. And I can link to a video with more information about Follow Me because there's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. But notice how if I select this surface right here, then I run Follow Me, it's going to remove material around the outside right here. But now I want to talk a little bit about the way that geometry works in SketchUp. This is actually going to be really important in a second. So let's say that we were to draw a box. So I'm going to draw a box right here. I'm going to pull it up like this. Then we're also going to draw a second box. And we're going to pull it up like this. So notice how if I click on these boxes, what this is going to do is this is going to allow me to select the individual parts and pieces of the boxes. Well, one of the things that you might have noticed is if I activate the Move tool. So I pre-select this geometry, tap the M key, and move it over here. One thing you might notice is that geometry actually fuses together. So if you push raw geometry together like this, that geometry is going to merge and it's going to affect the way that that geometry interacts, which can be really interesting. And so notice how the push-pull tool has a create new faces mode like this. So if I tap the control key, I can create a new face. But one thing that you might notice about this is as I extrude this up, like this. So I'm just going to use the push-pull tool. I'm scaling this in is all that I'm doing. But notice how if I select the edges that are in here and I move them around, it affects the geometry inside of SketchUp. So you can actually utilize the tools in SketchUp to use that sticky geometry to your advantage. But sometimes if you've got objects like these, you don't want them to stick together at all. And so if that's the case, what you can do is you can put them in what's known as a group. And so a group is basically a collection of geometry. It's like putting geometry in a box. And so if I select all of this, right click, and I click on the option for make group, notice how now when I click on this object, I can't select the individual faces anymore because this is grouped geometry. Now I can double click on a group and then select the individual faces and edit them. But as long as I'm outside of the group, I'm only going to get the whole group in here like this. What that means is that now if I move this object to this object and then move it away, notice how that geometry no longer merges together. This is fundamental to the organization of your models, and it's something you're going to want to learn because it's massively important. And so the second concept I want you to be familiar with. And one thing, if you want to ungroup geometry, you can right click on it and you can explode it in order to remove the group. So you can make a group, you can double click into the group in order to edit the geometry inside of the group. And you can also right click on it and you can explode it if you don't want it to be in a group anymore. You're not going to do that a ton, but it is worth knowing how to do. One other concept I want you to understand though is the concept of a component. And so what a component is it's like a smart group. So if I take this object right here, right click on it and click on make component instead of a group, notice how it's going to ask you some things like the name of the component, as well as things like the component axes. We're not going to worry too much about that for right now. We're just going to call this a box. It doesn't matter what you name it at the moment. Notice how there's a checkbox for replace selection with component. You want to check that. But where this gets important is a component basically is something where if you repeat it in the model multiple times like this, all of the instances or times that you've created that are going to get edited along with the original object. So notice how if I remove material from this object right here, this other component is going to maintain those changes. So anytime you have anything that's going to repeat multiple times inside of an object, you might consider using a component rather than a group. But it's going to act the same way in the sense that if you double click into it, you can edit it, other things like that. But I usually use components for repeating objects. Now, let's hop back to our door and window over here. And so remember, this is all raw geometry. So if we were to come in here right now and try to start editing this, the problem that we're going to run into is if I draw a window in here at the moment, all that geometry is going to merge and become a mess. Well, what I want to do is I want to select this object right here by dragging a box around it. I want to right click and I want to make this whole thing a group. And so when I do that, now notice how I can come in here and I can start modeling things like door frames and window frames without actually having to worry about the geometry merging together. This is massively important because it actually makes your model much more editable and adjustable. But let's say that we wanted to add a window. Well, what I want to do is I want to start by drawing a rectangle over this opening right here. And so we're going to use the offset tool. So you're going to tap the F key and we're going to offset this in by 1.5 inches. Hit the enter key. I'm going to delete out this face. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to push pull it so that it's the thickness of my wall right here. So now I've got a window frame. And so in this case, I'm going to take that window frame and I'm going to put it in a group because I like to keep everything grouped off so that none of the geometry is kind of moving together or anything like that. And we're just going to create a simple window frame. So what we're going to do is we're just going to notice how I'm outside of this group. I'm not inside of the group because I don't want this all to merge together, but I'm going to draw a line using the line tool. So L key, single click, move mouse. Notice how I'm holding my shift key in order to lock that inference, but I'm going to click right here. I'm going to draw an edge up like this. And now I've got one window frame. And I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to offset this in by whatever I think the thickness is going to be. We'll call it 1 inch. But then I'm going to push pull this out by whatever I think this thickness should be. So in this case, if the whole width is 3 inches, I'm going to say that this is probably 1.5 inches thick, like this. And I'm actually going to delete out this face right here. I'm going to take this whole thing, and this one, I'm going to make a component. And the reason why is because I'm going to have 2 of them. So I'm going to call this window slider right here. And you can really double click in here and just draw a pane. So I'm just going to tap the R key, single click, I'm going to orbit around. I'm going to draw a window pane right here. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to create a copy of this. We're going to get way more in depth on copies in the next video. But if I tap the M key and single click on this corner, notice how it just moves this. But if I tap the control key, it's going to create a copy. And I can create that copy over here like this. Well, now I can take this whole thing, I can make it a group, or if you're going to repeat it, you can make it a component, and we can call this window. And if you wanted to, you could double click in here. You can tap the B key in order to activate your paint bucket, and we could apply a glass material to the panes just like this. Now notice how you're going to want to make sure that you double click all the way in so that you can apply it to the individual faces. And I'm going to bring the opacity of the glass up a little bit, but now I've got a window in my model in my wall. And then finally, because this is getting a little bit long, we're going to do the same thing with our door. So I'm going to tap the R key. I'm going to single click like this. And in this case, I'm going to offset it in by the thickness of the frame, which I'm going to say is 2 inches. But I'm going to draw a line down on either side of these using the line tool. And I'm actually going to erase out those edges. And we're just going to do this the same way. We'll push pull this back to the back of the wall. We're going to select it and right click, and we're going to make it a group. And then we're going to draw our door. And so in this case, I'm just going to draw the door on the back side of the frame by drawing a rectangle. And I'm just going to extrude it up using the push pull tool right here. And in this case, you can triple click in order to select all connected geometry. I'm going to right click and I'm going to group this, but then I'm going to take this whole thing, I'm going to make this a component, or we're going to call this door, and hit the enter key. So now you know how to create walls, you know how to create openings, and you know how to create doors and windows. So if you do need any additional help learning to use SketchUp, you can definitely check out my course. That's my in-depth course, 100% step-by-step, and you also get access to me for support and other things like that. So if you do want to learn to use SketchUp, you can do that at TheSketchUpEssentials.com/course. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.